I'm Samantha, 34, an art teacher with a passion for creativity but a knack for family drama. My sister-in-law Jessica's wedding was supposed to be tense, given our history, but I never expected to be slapped across the face in front of 100 guests. The physical pain was nothing compared to watching my husband Brian rush to his sister's defense instead of mine. Just when I thought I'd lost everything, the groom surprised us all. Before I continue, where are you watching from? Hit like and subscribe to join our community of survivors who've learned to stand up for themselves. Brian and I celebrated our 7th wedding anniversary just 2 months before Jessica's wedding. We met at a community art fair where I was showcasing my students' work. He was charming, attentive, and seemed genuinely interested in my passion for teaching art. After a whirlwind romance, we married in a small ceremony attended by close friends and family. I knew from the beginning that Brian had a special bond with his younger sister Jessica. Growing up just 2 years apart, they shared an intense sibling connection that sometimes felt impenetrable to outsiders. Brian often reminisced about their childhood adventures and inside jokes, his face lighting up whenever he spoke about his baby sister. What I didn't immediately recognize were the warning signs of Jessica's controlling personality. During our engagement, she questioned Brian about his decision to marry so quickly despite our year-long relationship. At our wedding, she gave a toast that felt more like a roast, making pointed jokes about how I'd finally trapped a good one and suggesting Brian might come to his senses someday. When I expressed discomfort to Brian afterward, he shrugged it off. "That's just how Jessica is," he said, a phrase I would hear countless times over the years. "She has a unique sense of humor. You'll get used to it." Jessica's competitive nature extended beyond her relationship with her brother. She seemed determined to establish herself as superior to me in every way possible. When she learned I was just a teacher, her words, she made it a point to mention her corporate job and 6-figure salary at every family gathering. Never mind that I found profound fulfillment in nurturing young artistic talent. In Jessica's world, success was measured solely by income. Her undermining tactics were subtle but constant. When I brought homemade apple pie to Thanksgiving dinner, Jessica arrived with an elaborate store-bought dessert that she presented as if she'd spent days creating it. When Brian's parents complimented my pie, Jessica quickly redirected the conversation to her contribution, claiming she'd always had the family sweet tooth. During Christmas gift exchanges, she would study my presents to others carefully, then somehow managed to give something remarkably similar but more expensive. The year I hand-painted personalized mugs for everyone, Jessica presented them with professional-grade kitchen equipment, making my heartfelt gifts seem inadequate by comparison. Even my appearance wasn't safe from her criticism. "Bold choice wearing those shoes with that dress," she'd say with a smile that never reached her eyes. Or, "That haircut is so brave. I could never pull off something so unique." Each comment designed to sound like a compliment while delivering a subtle blow to my confidence. Through it all, Brian remained either oblivious or deliberately blind to his sister's behavior. "You're being too sensitive," he'd tell me on the drive home from family gatherings. "Jessica is just direct. She doesn't mean anything by it." Sometimes he'd even suggest I try harder to get along with her, as if the tension was entirely my fault. Despite the ongoing friction, I tried to maintain peace for Brian's sake. I smiled through Jessica's backhanded compliments, laughed off her competitive jabs, and did my best to limit our interactions to family gatherings where others could serve as buffers. Then Jessica met Kyle Mitchell, a successful attorney who specialized in family law. Unlike Jessica's previous boyfriends who seemed cut from the same ambitious, status-conscious cloth, Kyle struck me as surprisingly grounded. He asked thoughtful questions about my teaching career, seemed genuinely interested in my answers, and even shared that his mother had been an elementary school art teacher. I remember feeling a flicker of hope that Kyle's influence might soften Jessica's sharp edges. Perhaps seeing her brother happily married and now finding love herself would ease whatever insecurity fueled her need to compete with me. That hope was short-lived. As soon as Kyle proposed with a diamond that Jessica made sure everyone knew was flawless and nearly 3 carats, she transformed from merely difficult to completely unbearable. The woman became a hurricane of wedding demands, dress fittings, venue changes, and endless complaints about vendors who couldn't meet her exacting standards. Somehow, I got pulled into the vortex. Brian insisted I help with wedding preparations since family should support each other during important milestones. When I reminded him of Jessica's consistent mistreatment, he promised things would be different. She's stressed about the wedding, he explained. This could be your chance to finally bond with her. Against my better judgment, I agreed. Brian's hopeful expression was enough to make me try one more time. Maybe, just maybe, this shared experience would bridge the gap between Jessica and me. Besides, I reasoned, wedding planning would be temporary. I could endure anything for a few months, right? Little did I know that decision would lead to one of the most humiliating experiences of my life, forcing me to reevaluate not just my relationship with Jessica, but my entire marriage. 3 months before the wedding, Jessica called me directly, something that had never happened before. Usually, any communication came through Brian or occurred at family gatherings. I still remember staring at my phone in disbelief, wondering if there had been some emergency. "I want you to be one of my bridesmaids," she announced without preamble. No greeting, no small talk, just a statement delivered like a business proposition. I nearly dropped the phone. "Me? Are you sure?" "Of course I'm sure," she replied, sounding irritated by my surprise. "You're Brian's wife. It would look weird if you weren't included." Not exactly the heartwarming invitation I might have hoped for, but it seemed like progress. When I told Brian later that evening, his face lit up with excitement. "See? I told you she's making an effort. This is going to change everything between you two." I wanted to believe him, but something about Jessica's practical reasoning, it would look weird, left me uneasy. Still, I accepted the role, determined to support Brian and perhaps finally establish a better relationship with his sister. My first bridesmaid duty was attending a dress fitting. Jessica had selected bright magenta gowns that cost nearly $800 each, an amount that made a significant dent in my teacher's salary. When I gently asked if there might be more affordable options, Jessica's eyes narrowed. "If $800 is too much for your brother's only sister's wedding, I'm sure we can find someone else to fill your spot," she said coldly. I quickly backpedaled, assuring her the dress was beautiful and worth every penny. Later, when I mentioned the price to Brian, he shrugged and said, "It's a one-time expense for a special day." The dress ended up hanging in my closet, unworn until the wedding, because Jessica changed her mind 2 weeks later and selected completely different styles in emerald green instead, at an additional $900. The bridesmaids group chat became a source of daily anxiety. Jessica would send messages at all hours with new demands, changed plans, and passive-aggressive comments whenever someone couldn't immediately respond. I noticed I was often left off smaller gatherings, a quick lunch with the bridesmaids or an impromptu shopping trip, only to be chastised later for not being fully committed to my bridesmaid duties. Everyone else made it to the brunch on Saturday, Jessica complained during a cake tasting I had been invited to. "I guess teaching art doesn't keep you as busy as you claim." I bit my tongue, not mentioning that I'd never been told about any brunch. The other bridesmaids, mostly Jessica's college friends and cousins, exchanged knowing looks, clearly having accepted Jessica's narrative that I was the difficult, uncooperative sister-in-law. As the wedding approached, I decided to create something special for the couple. Using my artistic skills, I designed a personalized artwork featuring important dates and locations in Kyle and Jessica's relationship, incorporated into an abstract heart design. I spent weeks perfecting it, working late into the night after grading papers and planning lessons. The finished piece was something I felt genuinely proud of, elegant, meaningful, and completely unique. 2 weeks before the wedding, I visited Jessica's apartment to help assemble welcome bags for out-of-town guests. As I entered her living room, I froze. There, spread across the coffee table, were wedding favor tags featuring my exact design, the same stylized heart, the same integration of dates, even the same color palette I had developed. "Jessica," I said carefully, "these look exactly like the artwork I've been creating for your wedding gift. How did you get this design?" She barely glanced up from her task. Oh, I saw your sketches when I was at your house last month. It looked perfect for the favor tags, so I had a graphic designer clean it up and print them. You went through my studio? I asked, feeling violated. My home studio was my private space, and the idea of Jessica rummaging through my personal work without permission made my stomach turn. Don't be so dramatic, Samantha, she replied with an eye roll. Brian showed me when I asked what you were working on. It's not like it's some big secret. When I confronted Brian that evening, his response was predictably dismissive. Jess really loves your design. Isn't that a compliment? I don't understand why you're so upset. Because she took my work without asking, Brian. And now my gift isn't special anymore, she's already using the design for party favors. Can't you just be happy she finally appreciates something you've done? He countered. This could be a turning point for you too if you'd stop finding problems where there aren't any. I left the room before saying something I might regret. As I closed the door, I heard Brian calling Jessica, no doubt to tell her about my overreaction. The betrayal stung deeply, not just Jessica's theft of my design, but Brian's casual dismissal of my feelings. The next day, I received a tearful call from Jessica. I can't believe you're trying to create drama right before my wedding, she sobbed. I thought using your design was a way to include you, to show you're part of the family. But you always twist everything to make me look bad. Before I could respond, she continued, Kyle thinks I should apologize for not asking permission, but honestly, Samantha, your attitude is the real problem here. I'm under so much stress, and instead of supporting me, you're making everything worse. I later learned from Kyle himself that he had witnessed the entire situation differently. At a final venue walkthrough that Brian couldn't attend, Kyle pulled me aside. I want you to know that I understand what happened with your artwork, he said quietly. Jessica told me she found inspiration in something you created, but when I saw the favor tags and heard they were identical to your gift. He shook his head. That wasn't right, and I told her so. His acknowledgement brought unexpected tears to my eyes. After years of gaslighting and dismissal, having someone validate my feelings was overwhelming. Thank you, I managed to say. That means a lot. Kyle looked troubled. I've noticed how things can be between you two. Just so you know, not everyone sees the situation the way Jessica presents it. That brief conversation gave me the courage to consider stepping down from my bridesmaid role. That evening, I carefully explained to Brian that perhaps it would be best for everyone if I attended simply as his wife, not as part of the bridal party. His reaction was explosive. You want to drop out 2 weeks before the wedding? Do you have any idea how that would look? How it would hurt Jessica? How it would affect our entire family? Brian, I've tried so hard, but... No, he interrupted, his voice softening as he took my hands. Sam, please. Do this for our family. For me. After the wedding, things will settle down, and we can work on your relationship with Jess. But please, don't create a scene now. His pleading expression, the mention of our family, and the promise of future resolution wore down my resistance. I agreed to continue as planned, ignoring the sinking feeling in my stomach. The final straw came during our last dress fitting. The emerald gowns had been altered, and all 6 bridesmaids stood in a row as Jessica inspected each of us with a critical eye. When she reached me, her smile turned brittle. Samantha, have you been stress eating? The waist looks tighter than at your last fitting. The seamstress immediately defended her work, explaining that no adjustments had been made to the waist since the previous fitting. But Jessica continued, maybe you should skip carbs until the wedding. I need everyone looking their best in photos. The other bridesmaids studiously avoided my gaze, uncomfortable but unwilling to contradict the bride. I felt my cheeks burn with humiliation but forced myself to smile and nod. 1 more week, I told myself. Just 1 more week, and this would all be over. Little did I know, the worst was yet to come. I woke up on Jessica's wedding day with a knot in my stomach. Despite a restless night, I applied my makeup carefully, styled my hair according to Jessica's precise instructions, and slipped into the emerald gown that had caused so much drama. Brian had left early to join the groomsmen, leaving me to drive to the venue alone, another small slight that added to my growing anxiety. Today is about Jessica and Kyle, I reminded my reflection in the mirror. Just smile, take photos, and get through the day. I forced my facial muscles into what I hoped resembled a genuine smile, practicing the expression I would need to maintain for the next 12 hours. The bridal party was instructed to arrive at the Four Seasons Hotel by 10 a.m. for pre-ceremony bonding and photos. When I entered the designated suite, the atmosphere immediately chilled. Jessica, already half through her professional makeup application, acknowledged my arrival with a curt nod. "You're late," she said, though my watch showed exactly 10 a.m. "Everyone else has been here since 9:30. I apologized, though I had followed the written schedule precisely. Jessica's maid of honor, her cousin Heather, gave me a sympathetic glance but quickly returned her attention to the bride. The morning proceeded with mimosas, which I declined, wanting to keep a clear head, a professional photographer capturing candid moments of the bridesmaids laughing together, and careful avoidance of any topic that might upset Jessica. I found myself relegated to the periphery, included in photos but excluded from conversations. Around 11, chaos erupted when the florist called to report a problem with the centerpieces. Jessica dissolved into tears, claiming her vision was ruined and the wedding might as well be cancelled. As the other bridesmaids clustered around her with reassurances, I slipped out to call the florist directly. 20 minutes and several negotiations later, I had arranged for replacement arrangements to be delivered in time for the reception. When I returned to share the news, Jessica's response was tepid at best. "I suppose that will have to do," she said with a sigh, as if accepting a significant disappointment rather than a complete resolution to the problem. Heather caught up with me in the hallway afterward. "That was really great of you to fix the flower situation," she said quietly. "Anyone would have done the same," I replied. "No, they wouldn't." She glanced back toward the suite. "Look, I've known Jessica since we were kids, and I love her, but I see how she treats you. It's not right." Before I could respond, the wedding planner appeared, ushering us back inside for final preparations. As we gathered our belongings to head to the ceremony site, I overheard Jessica speaking to another bridesmaid near the bathroom. "I can't believe she's wearing that necklace when I specifically said simple jewelry only," Jessica hissed. "It's like she's deliberately trying to stand out. Brian says she's always seeking attention." I instinctively touched the small silver pendant at my throat, a gift from my late grandmother and the only jewelry I wore besides my wedding band. Heat rushed to my face as I realized they were talking about me, and worse, that Brian had apparently been criticizing me to his sister. The ceremony itself passed in a blur of practiced movements. "Stand here, hold the bouquet there, smile for the camera." Despite everything, Jessica made a stunning bride, and Kyle's face as she walked down the aisle showed genuine adoration. For a moment, I felt a pang of something like hope, perhaps marriage to this kind man would soften Jessica's sharp edges. That hope began to fade during the reception. The seating arrangement placed me at a table far from the family section, surrounded by distant relatives I'd never met. Brian sat at the head table with the bridal party, seemingly unconcerned by our separation. Whenever I caught his eye, he would smile and wave, but made no effort to join me or invite me to his table. Instead, he spent most of the cocktail hour laughing with Jessica's college friends, his arm casually draped around one petite blonde who kept touching his chest as she spoke. Nothing inappropriate, perhaps, but the casual intimacy bothered me, especially given his absence from my side at an event where I already felt isolated. "Samantha, right? Brian's wife?" I turned to find an older couple smiling warmly at me. They introduced themselves as Kyle's parents, Martha and James Mitchell. "We've been hoping to meet you," Martha said. "Kyle mentioned you're an art teacher. Our daughter-in-law tells us you're very talented." I blinked in surprise. "Jessica said that?" James chuckled. "Well, no, Kyle did. But we're so pleased Brian's family and ours are joining together today." Their kindness was a balm to my increasingly frayed nerves. We chatted about their own 40-year marriage, my teaching career, and their excitement about Kyle finding happiness. Not once did they make me feel like an outsider, and I found myself relaxing for the first time that day. Our conversation was interrupted by the announcement of dinner service. As the evening progressed, I noticed Jessica becoming increasingly animated, her gestures more expansive, her laughter louder. The champagne flowed freely, and she seemed to be partaking generously. During the traditional toasts, I noticed something odd. Several guests would look in my direction after Jessica's maid of honor spoke, their expressions confused or pitying. When Brian rose to toast his sister, he made a pointed comment about family loyalty being the most important bond while looking directly at me. The knot in my stomach tightened. After dinner, as dancing began, I decided I'd fulfilled my obligations. Brian was deep in conversation with his cousins, Jessica was twirling on the dance floor with her father, and no one would miss me if I slipped away early. I gathered my wrap and clutch, preparing to call a rideshare, when Kyle intercepted me near the exit. "Leaving so soon?" he asked, genuine concern in his expression. "I'm just tired," I explained. "It's been a long day." Kyle studied me for a moment. "Jessica can be challenging. Especially when she drinks. But please don't leave yet. The night's just getting started, and honestly." He lowered his voice. "I could use an ally who's not caught up in the Thompson family drama." His honest admission made me smile despite myself. "All right," I agreed. "One more hour." I couldn't have known that within that hour, everything would fall apart. The reception was in full swing when Jessica spotted me near the dessert table. She had kicked off her heels, her carefully styled hair had begun to come loose, and she clutched a half-empty champagne flute in one hand. Despite these signs of dishevelment, she moved with surprising steadiness as she approached me. "Sam," she exclaimed, throwing an arm around my shoulders. "My sister. My brother's wife." Her words slurred slightly, but her eyes remained sharp and focused. "Hi, Jessica," I replied cautiously. "Beautiful reception. You must be thrilled." "Oh, I am. Everything is perfect." She leaned closer, her breath hot against my ear. "Except for one tiny thing." I tensed, sensing the shift in her tone. "What's that?" "You." She pulled back, still smiling, though the expression didn't reach her eyes. "You trying to make this day about yourself?" The abrupt accusation caught me off guard. "I don't understand what you mean." Jessica's voice rose slightly, attracting the attention of nearby guests. "Don't play innocent. Everyone can see what you've been doing." I glanced around nervously, noticing several people pretending not to listen while casting curious glances our way. "Jessica, maybe we should talk about this later," I suggested quietly. "No, let's talk now." She took another swig of champagne. "Let's talk about how you tried to overshadow my bridal shower by announcing your stupid art exhibition that same weekend." "That was a school function scheduled months in advance," I explained, keeping my voice low. "I wasn't even in charge of the date." Jessica continued as if I hadn't spoken. "Or how about that dress you're wearing?" I specifically said simple and elegant, but you had to add that showy slit and that attention-grabbing necklace. The dress was exactly as she had selected for all bridesmaids, and the necklace was a small silver pendant that had belonged to my grandmother, hardly flashy or inappropriate for a formal event. "And then," Jessica continued, her voice rising further, "I see you cozying up to my in-laws, trying to charm them like you charm everyone with your sweet teacher act." More heads turned our way. From the corner of my eye, I could see Kyle notice the confrontation from across the room, his expression concerned as he excused himself from a conversation. "Jessica," I tried again, "you're upset, and I understand it's been an emotional day. Why don't we?" "Don't patronize me," she snapped. "And let's not forget the worst part, I've seen how you look at Kyle. The private conversations, the little smiles. My own brother warned me about your jealousy issues." At this accusation, I felt a surge of both hurt and anger. Brian had apparently been feeding Jessica's paranoia, reinforcing her worst thoughts about me instead of defending my character. That's completely untrue, I stated firmly. I've only ever wanted you to be happy, Jessica. Despite everything, I've tried to support your relationship and this wedding. Liar, she hissed, her face contorted with rage. A small crowd had gathered now, uncomfortable witnesses to the unfolding scene. I saw Kyle pushing through the onlookers, moving with purpose toward us. Brian was nowhere to be seen. I think you've had too much to drink, I said, attempting to defuse the situation one last time. Let's get you some water, Anne. The slap came out of nowhere, a stinging, open-handed blow across my left cheek that snapped my head to the side and sent a shock of pain radiating through my face. The sound echoed in the sudden silence that fell over the reception. For a moment, time seemed to stop. My hand rose instinctively to my burning cheek as I stared at Jessica in disbelief. The champagne flute she had been holding shattered on the floor, crystal shards scattering across the polished marble. Jessica stood frozen, her hand still raised, looking almost as shocked by her action as I felt. Then reality crashed back. Tears sprang to my eyes, not just from physical pain but from the profound humiliation of being assaulted in front of a room full of people. Whispers erupted around us. Someone gasped. A camera flashed. Kyle had almost reached us when Brian finally appeared, pushing through the crowd with a concerned expression that gave me a moment's hope. He would defend me now, surely. He would see what his sister had done and finally stand up for his wife. Instead, he gripped my upper arm firmly and pulled me away from the scene, hissing under his breath, "What did you do to provoke her? This is her wedding day." The betrayal of that moment, being treated as the aggressor when I had just been physically assaulted, knocked the breath from my lungs more effectively than Jessica's slap had done. I began, but Brian cut me off. Just go wait in the hallway. I need to make sure Jess is okay. He turned his back on me, returning to comfort his sister, who had now dissolved into dramatic sobs, surrounded by sympathetic bridesmaids. As I stood alone, cheek throbbing and eyes filling with tears, I caught Kyle's gaze across the room. Unlike everyone else who seemed to be either staring or deliberately looking away, his expression held nothing but compassion and what appeared to be deep disappointment, though whether in Jessica, Brian, or the situation as a whole, I couldn't tell. Humiliated and abandoned, I turned and fled toward the exit, dignity in tatters and marriage suddenly hanging by the thinnest of threads. The hallway outside the reception ballroom offered little refuge. Hotel guests passing by cast curious glances at me, a crying woman in a bridesmaid dress with a reddening handprint visible on her cheek. I tried to compose myself, fumbling through my clutch for tissues while simultaneously attempting to order a rideshare on my phone with shaking hands. Before I could complete the booking, the ballroom doors burst open. Brian emerged, followed closely by Jessica and several bridesmaids. His expression was a mixture of anger and embarrassment that made my stomach clench. "Sam, what were you thinking?" he demanded, loud enough for everyone in the vicinity to hear. "You know how important today is to Jessica." I stared at him incredulously. "She slapped me, Brian. In front of everyone. Because you provoked her." Jessica interjected, her voice trembling with what sounded like practiced victimhood. "You've been trying to ruin my wedding from the beginning." The bridesmaids murmured in agreement, forming a protective circle around Jessica. One of them handed her a fresh glass of champagne, which she accepted with a trembling hand. "That's not true," I said, struggling to keep my voice steady. "I've done nothing but try to support this wedding, despite how I've been treated." Brian ran a hand through his hair in frustration. "This is exactly the problem, Sam. You always make everything about you. Jessica is stressed and emotional, it's her wedding day. But you couldn't just let her have this one day without creating drama." Each word felt like another slap. Years of memories flashed through my mind, all the times Brian had dismissed my feelings, all the occasions when Jessica's behavior was excused while I was expected to be the bigger person. A pattern so clear now that I wondered how I had missed it for so long. "She hit me," I repeated, touching my cheek where the sting was fading but the humiliation remained fresh. How can you defend that? It was a reaction. Brian snapped. You know how Jessica gets when she's pushed too far. That statement, so casually revealing the dynamic of our entire relationship, struck me with stunning clarity. In Brian's world, his sister was allowed to react however she wanted, while I was expected to endure any mistreatment without complaint. Jessica's performance continued behind him. I just wanted a perfect day, she sobbed to her attendants. After everything I've done to include her, after all my efforts to accept her into our family. The blatant rewriting of history might have angered me if I hadn't suddenly felt so tired. Bone-deep exhaustion settled over me as I recognized the futility of defending myself. In this scenario, I had already been cast as the villain, and nothing I could say would change the script. I'm going home, I said quietly. Brian's expression hardened. No, you're not. You're going to apologize to Jessica, and then you're going to rejoin the reception and act like nothing happened. I can't do that. Can't or won't, he challenged. This is my sister's wedding, Sam. I'm not leaving, and neither should you. It would only create more gossip. The realization that he cared more about appearances than my dignity was the final blow. Then stay, I said, my voice surprisingly calm. Stay with your sister. I'm leaving. For a moment, something like uncertainty flickered across Brian's face, as if he was finally hearing me. But then Jessica called his name, her voice small and tearful, and whatever moment of clarity he might have been approaching vanished. Fine, he said coldly. Run away like you always do when things get difficult. I'll tell everyone you weren't feeling well. He turned his back on me, returning to comfort Jessica. I watched as he slipped an arm around her shoulders, leading her and her entourage back toward the reception. Not one of them looked back at me. Alone in the hallway, I sank onto a bench, trying to process what had just happened. My marriage, which I had believed was fundamentally solid despite its challenges, suddenly seemed built on sand. Had Brian always prioritized Jessica over me? Had I been blind to the reality of our relationship, or had I simply been making excuses for behavior I didn't want to acknowledge? My hands shook as I finally managed to order a car. While waiting, I removed the emerald earrings that matched the bridesmaid dress, placing them in my clutch. They belonged to Jessica, like so many other aspects of this day. The necklace from my grandmother stayed where it was, one of the few pieces of myself I had managed to maintain. The weight of public humiliation pressed down on me as I sat alone. Not just the slap itself, but the aftermath, being treated as the instigator rather than the victim, watching people who had smiled at me during the ceremony now closing ranks against me. I imagined the whispers that would follow this incident, the story that would be told at future family gatherings where I might or might not be present. My rideshare app pinged, indicating the driver's arrival. I stood on unsteady legs, moving toward the hotel entrance with as much dignity as I could muster. The cool evening air hit my tear-stained face as I pushed through the revolving doors. Sam. Wait. I turned to see Kyle jogging toward me, still in his wedding tuxedo but with the tie loosened and the top button undone. He looked worried and slightly out of breath. Are you okay? He asked, reaching me just as my car pulled up to the curb. Not really, I admitted, too drained for pretense. I saw what happened in there, he said, lowering his voice. All of it. Jessica was completely out of line, and the way Brian reacted. He shook his head, genuine disappointment evident in his expression. It's complicated, I said weakly, defaulting to the excuse I had made for years. No, it's not, Kyle replied firmly. What happened in there wasn't okay. None of it. The unexpected validation brought fresh tears to my eyes. I need to go. Kyle glanced at the waiting car, then back at me. I understand. But can you wait just 5 more minutes? Please? Something in his expression, a mixture of determination and what looked almost like a plan, made me hesitate. 5 minutes, I agreed, not understanding why but too emotionally exhausted to question further. Thank you, he said, already turning back toward the hotel entrance. Just 5 minutes. I promise it will be worth it. As he disappeared through the revolving doors, I asked the driver to wait, wondering what possible difference 5 more minutes could make after an evening of complete catastrophe. Little did I know that Kyle's request would lead to a moment that would change everything. Kyle disappeared back into the hotel, leaving me standing beside the idling car. I explained to the confused driver that I needed a few more minutes, tipping him extra for his patience. Part of me considered leaving anyway. Hadn't I endured enough humiliation for one evening? But curiosity kept me rooted to the spot. What could Kyle possibly do in 5 minutes that would make any difference? As I waited, I found myself pondering the absurdity of the situation. The groom, on his wedding night, rushing outside to speak with his sister-in-law while his bride and the entire reception waited inside. If nothing else, it would give Jessica another reason to resent me. Just as I was about to give up and get in the car, the sound of audio feedback, the unmistakable squeal of a microphone being adjusted, drifted through the hotel's open doors. Then Kyle's voice, amplified by the sound system, caught my attention. "Excuse me, everyone. Could I have your attention for a moment?" Curiosity drew me back toward the entrance. I slipped into the lobby, then cautiously approached the partially open ballroom doors. From my position, I could see Kyle standing in the center of the dance floor, microphone in hand, his expression uncharacteristically serious. "I know this is unusual," he continued, his voice steady despite the confused murmurs from the guests. "But something happened earlier that I can't ignore, and as the groom, I think I have the right to address it." The room fell silent. From my vantage point, I could see Jessica sitting at the head table, her expression a mixture of confusion and growing alarm. Brian stood nearby, brow furrowed as he watched his new brother-in-law. "Many of you witnessed an incident a short while ago," Kyle said, his gaze sweeping the room. "My new wife slapped her sister-in-law, Samantha, across the face." Gasps and uncomfortable shifting followed his blunt statement. Jessica's mouth fell open in shock. "What you may not know," Kyle continued, "is that this wasn't an isolated incident. It was the culmination of a pattern of behavior that I've witnessed since I entered this family." Brian stepped forward, hand outstretched. "Kyle, man, this isn't the time." "Actually, Brian, it is exactly the time," Kyle interrupted, his voice firm. "Because I've spent months watching how your sister treats your wife. I've seen the constant criticism, the undermining comments, the competitive behavior. I've watched Samantha try repeatedly to build a relationship with Jessica despite being rejected at every turn." The room was now completely silent, every guest frozen in place as the groom continued his unexpected speech. "I've witnessed Jessica take credit for Samantha's ideas, mock her career, and criticize her appearance. And most disappointing of all, I've seen you, Brian, not only fail to defend your wife but actively take your sister's side in conflicts Jessica herself created." Brian's face flushed red. Jessica began to rise from her seat, but Kyle pressed on. "What none of you know is that 3 weeks ago, I seriously considered calling off this wedding." This revelation caused another ripple of shocked murmurs through the crowd. Jessica sank back into her chair, her face pale. When I saw Jessica steal Samantha's original artwork without permission or credit, when I witnessed how she manipulated the situation to make Samantha appear unreasonable for being upset, I questioned whether I truly knew the woman I was marrying. Kyle's gaze found Jessica directly now. "I love you, Jessica. But I cannot and will not pretend that your behavior tonight, or your treatment of Samantha over the years, is acceptable. Physical violence is never justified, and the fact that your family rushed to defend you rather than check on the person you assaulted speaks volumes about dynamics I'm only beginning to fully understand." Jessica's composure finally broke. "She provoked me," she shouted, tears streaming down her face. "After everything I've done to include her in this wedding, she still had to make it about her." Kyle shook his head sadly. "That's not what happened, and deep down, you know it. The stress of wedding planning doesn't excuse treating people this way. It doesn't excuse hitting someone." He turned his attention back to the stunned guests. "I owe Samantha an apology. I've seen what's been happening and said nothing, believing it wasn't my place to intervene in family dynamics." That silence makes me complicit, and for that, I am truly sorry. My heart pounded as I stood half-hidden by the ballroom doors. Never in my wildest imagination had I expected anyone to publicly acknowledge what I had experienced for years, let alone stand up for me this way. "Samantha," Kyle called out, apparently assuming I was still in the room somewhere. "If you're here, I want you to know that you deserved better treatment than you received tonight, and for many nights before this one." I found myself stepping forward, pushing through the doors fully into the ballroom. Every head turned in my direction. I felt exposed, vulnerable, yet somehow strengthened by Kyle's words. Kyle spotted me and gave a gentle smile. "There you are. Would you join me for a moment?" On trembling legs, I made my way through the parted crowd to the center of the dance floor. The red mark on my cheek felt like a beacon under the bright reception lights, but for once, I didn't try to hide my hurt. "I'm sorry," Kyle said directly to me, lowering the microphone for a moment. "I know this is uncomfortable, but some things need to be said aloud." I nodded, unable to form words past the lump in my throat. Kyle raised the microphone again. "I'm asking everyone who witnessed what happened earlier to consider your own role in this situation. When someone was physically assaulted in front of you, did you speak up? Did you check if she was okay? Or did you look away and pretend it didn't happen?" Uncomfortable glances were exchanged throughout the room. Many guests studied their shoes or wine glasses, unwilling to meet Kyle's challenging gaze. "Jessica," Kyle continued, turning to his bride, "I still want our marriage to work. But it has to be built on honesty and respect, not just between us, but in how we treat everyone around us. What you did tonight was wrong, and pretending it was justified by wedding stress doesn't make it better." Jessica's tear-streaked face crumpled further, but something in her expression suggested she was finally hearing the words. "And Brian," Kyle addressed my husband, who stood rigid with shock and embarrassment. "Your wife deserved your protection tonight. The fact that your first instinct was to defend the person who hit her rather than ensure her well-being should give you serious pause." Brian's eyes finally found mine across the room, and in them I saw the first glimmers of genuine shame. "I believe people can change," Kyle concluded, "but only when they're willing to acknowledge their mistakes. So while this is certainly not how I imagined my wedding reception would go, I hope this moment can be the beginning of healing rather than another wound to ignore." He held out his hand to me, and without hesitation, I took it. In that moment, standing before a room of uncomfortable witnesses with the truth finally laid bare, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years within the Thompson family circle: dignity. Jessica rose from her seat and rushed from the room, sobbing. Brian hesitated, torn between following his sister and approaching me. After a moment's indecision, he moved toward the exit Jessica had taken. Some things, it seemed, hadn't changed yet. But as I stood beside Kyle, receiving supportive glances from guests who had been shocked into awareness, I realized that something fundamental had shifted. The dynamic that had trapped me for years had been exposed to light, and things exposed cannot easily return to shadow. The ride home from the wedding was silent and tense. Brian had eventually returned to the reception, finding me sitting with Kyle's parents, who had been kind enough to offer their company after the dramatic confrontation. When Brian suggested we leave, I agreed, too emotionally drained to do anything else. In the car, the weight of unspoken words pressed between us. Brian gripped the steering wheel tightly, his knuckles white with tension. Several times he opened his mouth as if to speak, then closed it again, apparently unable to find the right words. It wasn't until we entered our home that the dam finally broke. "Kyle had no right to embarrass Jessica that way," Brian said, loosening his tie with sharp, angry movements. "It was her wedding day." I set my clutch down on the entry table, suddenly too tired to maintain the facade of normalcy we'd been operating under for years. "Your sister slapped me across the face in front of 100 people, Brian. You saw the mark it left." I touched my cheek, where the redness had faded but a dull ache remained. "And your first instinct was to ask what I did to provoke her?" "You know how Jessica gets when she's emotional," he replied, the familiar excuse sounding hollow even to my ears. "The wedding was stressful for her. That's not good enough anymore." The words came out quietly but with a firmness that surprised us both. It's never been good enough, but I accepted it because I loved you. I wanted your family to accept me. I kept hoping things would improve if I just tried harder, if I was more patient, more understanding. Brian sank onto the couch, running his hands through his hair. Sam, I know Jessica can be difficult. Difficult? I interrupted, my voice rising. Brian, your sister has been systematically undermining me for 7 years. She criticizes everything from my career to my appearance. She takes credit for my ideas. She stole my artwork without permission. And tonight, she physically assaulted me. That's not difficult, that's toxic. And you've enabled it every step of the way. That's not fair, he protested, but his voice lacked conviction. Isn't it? When was the last time you defended me against Jessica's comments? When have you ever told her that her behavior toward me was unacceptable? I waited, but Brian remained silent. That's what I thought. So what are you saying? He finally asked, a note of fear creeping into his voice. I'm saying I can't do this anymore. Not like this. I took a deep breath, steadying myself. I'm going to stay with Allison for a while. I need space to think about whether this marriage is actually working for either of us. Brian's head snapped up, panic flashing across his features. You're leaving me? Over one bad night? No, Brian. Not over one bad night. Over a pattern that's been clear for years, but that I've been too willing to excuse. I moved toward our bedroom to pack an overnight bag. What happened tonight just forced me to finally see it clearly. The next morning, I called in sick to work and drove to my friend Allison's house, where she welcomed me with open arms and no judgment. Over cups of tea at her kitchen table, I poured out the whole story, not just of the wedding disaster, but of the years of subtle undermining, gaslighting, and divided loyalties that had led to that moment. I always wondered why you put up with it, Allison said gently. You're so strong in every other area of your life, but with Brian and his family, you just shrink. Her observation hit home. I had become so accustomed to making myself smaller, to accommodating Jessica's need to be the center of attention and Brian's unwillingness to rock the family boat, that I'd lost sight of my own worth. I think I was afraid, I admitted. Afraid that if I pushed back too hard, I'd lose Brian. And then Jessica would win. Allison reached across the table to squeeze my hand. But in trying not to lose, you've been losing pieces of yourself all along. That week became a period of profound reflection. I spoke with a counselor who specialized in family dynamics, trying to understand my own role in the dysfunctional patterns that had defined my marriage. Brian called and texted repeatedly, his messages evolving from defensive anger to confused hurt to what sounded like genuine remorse. I keep replaying everything in my mind, he said during one phone conversation. Not just the wedding, but all of it. The way Jess speaks to you, the way I've dismissed your feelings. I didn't see it, or maybe I didn't want to see it. Where is Jessica now? I asked, curious despite myself. She and Kyle postponed their honeymoon, Brian replied. They're in counseling. Kyle was serious about wanting their marriage to work, but not without changes. The news surprised me. Jessica agreed to counseling? Kyle made it a condition of moving forward. And I think the public nature of what happened forced her to see herself differently. He paused. I've started seeing someone too. A therapist, I mean. Just 2 sessions so far, but it's been eye-opening. His words gave me a flicker of hope, though I cautioned myself against expecting too much too soon. Real change would require more than a few therapy sessions and moments of insight. Unexpectedly, Kyle reached out to me directly a week after the wedding. His text was simple, "Hope you're doing okay." I meant what I said that night. We met for coffee at a neutral location, an experience that might have felt awkward but somehow didn't. Kyle explained that he and Jessica were working through difficult conversations about family dynamics, boundaries, and accountability. She's struggling, he admitted. Facing your own behavior is hard, especially when you've spent years justifying it. But I believe she wants to change, even if she doesn't always know how. Why did you do it? I asked the question that had been burning in my mind. Stand up for me that way, I mean. It was your wedding night. Kyle considered the question seriously. Because some things are more important than a perfect wedding. The person I want to be, the husband I want to be, couldn't pretend what happened was okay. He offered a small smile. Besides, any marriage that can't withstand the truth probably wouldn't last anyway. His integrity and clarity were refreshing after years of Brian's equivocation and Jessica's manipulation. 2 weeks after moving to Allison's, I agreed to meet Brian for dinner. He arrived early, looking both nervous and determined. The changes were subtle but noticeable. He made eye contact when I spoke, really listened instead of formulating his defense, and didn't once mention what Jessica would think about our conversation. I've been doing a lot of thinking, he said after we ordered. About us, about my family, about patterns I didn't even realize were there. What kind of patterns? I asked, curious about what he'd discovered on his own. My therapist pointed out that I've always played peacekeeper between my parents and Jessica. She was difficult even as a child. Tantrums, drama, always needing to be the center of attention. My parents would give in to keep the peace, and I learned to do the same. He traced the rim of his water glass. I brought that same approach into our marriage without even realizing it. You prioritized Jessica's feelings over mine, I said simply, not accusingly. He nodded, a flush of shame coloring his cheeks. Yes. And I justified it by telling myself she needed more support, that you were stronger and could handle it. But that wasn't fair to you. It wasn't being a good husband. For the first time in our relationship, Brian was seeing clearly, without the filter of family obligation distorting his perspective. It was the conversation I had been waiting years to have. I'd like to try again, he said, reaching tentatively for my hand across the table. Not just pick up where we left off, but actually rebuild something healthier. With boundaries and respect and putting us first. I didn't immediately accept or reject his proposal. Instead, we agreed to couples therapy, a neutral space where we could navigate the rebuilding of trust that had been so fundamentally damaged. Our therapist, Dr. Melissa Chen, didn't offer easy solutions. Changing family dynamics takes time, she cautioned during our first session. And it requires everyone's participation. You can establish healthier boundaries in your marriage, but you can't force Jessica to respect them. I understand that, Brian said, surprising me with his resolve. But I can control my response. I can make it clear that disrespecting Sam means damaging my relationship with Jessica too. It was the first time he had ever suggested any consequence for his sister's behavior, and though I remained cautious, that moment represented a significant shift in our relationship. 6 months after Jessica's wedding, we found ourselves at Brian's parents' home for a family dinner, the first time all of us would be in the same room since the infamous reception. Jessica and Kyle arrived last, an uncharacteristic nervousness evident in her demeanor as she entered. Our eyes met across the living room, and after a moment's hesitation, Jessica approached me directly. Can we talk privately? She asked, her usual confidence notably absent. In the guest bedroom, away from the others, Jessica took a deep breath. Kyle says I should just apologize without making excuses, she began. That's harder than it sounds. I remained silent, letting her find her way through the uncomfortable moment. I'm sorry for how I've treated you, Samantha. Not just at the wedding, but for years. She twisted her wedding ring anxiously. I've been seeing a therapist. She thinks I've been competing with you because I was afraid of losing my place in Brian's life. A small, self-deprecating laugh escaped her. Apparently I have substantial insecurity issues. Who knew? The apology wasn't perfect, but it was sincere, perhaps the first truly sincere interaction we'd ever had. Thank you for saying that, I replied. It means a lot. I don't expect us to be best friends, Jessica continued. But I'd like to try again. To do better. She hesitated. Carl really respects you, you know. He says you showed more grace that night than anyone had a right to expect. Hearing those words from Jessica, acknowledgement not just of her wrongdoing but of my character, felt like the closing of a chapter that had been left painfully open. The dinner that followed wasn't magically perfect. There were still awkward moments, old habits that threatened to resurface. But there was also something new, Brian's hand firmly holding mine under the table, Carl gently redirecting Jessica when her tone sharpened, and Jessica herself catching and correcting her behavior more often than not. Later that night, in the privacy of our bedroom, I had moved back home a month earlier. Brian wrapped his arms around me. "I'm proud of us," he said softly. "This isn't easy, but it's right." "It's a process," I agreed, resting my head on his shoulder. "But for the first time, I feel like we're all actually in it together." The journey toward healthier family dynamics continues daily. There are still moments when old patterns threaten to re-emerge, when Brian must consciously choose to prioritize our marriage, when Jessica struggles with her competitive instincts. But the difference now is awareness. The toxic patterns that once operated in shadow have been brought to light, named, and challenged. I've learned that recognizing your worth doesn't always mean walking away. Sometimes it means standing firmly in your truth and requiring others to meet you there. It means setting boundaries and maintaining them even when it's uncomfortable. It means accepting apologies without erasing accountability. Most importantly, I've learned that change is possible when people truly commit to it, not perfect, immediate transformation, but the slow, steady work of becoming better than we were. As I reflect on the journey from that painful wedding night to where we are now, I wonder about others who might be trapped in similar family dynamics. Have you ever found yourself diminished in a relationship, making yourself smaller to accommodate someone else's need to be bigger? Have you recognized toxic patterns in your own family but felt powerless to change them? Share your experiences in the comments below. Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear to find their own courage. And if this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe for more conversations about family dynamics, boundaries, and the complex journey of healing relationships. Remember, the first step toward change is simply acknowledging the truth, however uncomfortable it might be. Thank you for listening, and may you find the strength to honor your worth in every relationship in your life.